Imagine waking up and realizing the seasons are broken. Not a bad day, not bad weather. An entire year where summer never came. This is not a theory. This actually happened. Today, we're not just talking about history. Using modern AI tools, we're bringing the year 1816 back to life, so you can see it, feel it, and experience it like the people who lived through it. Watch till the end, because this is going to be one of the most disturbing journeys into the past you've ever taken. Before we talk about cold, before hunger, before fear, we need to understand something important. Nothing was wrong, not officially, not visibly, not in the way disasters usually announce themselves. The early 1800s were not a dark age, they were a time of confidence. Across Europe and North America, people believed the world made sense. Nature followed rules. Seasons arrived on schedule. The future could be planned. Farmers understood this better than anyone. They didn't need calendars. They didn't need forecasts. They watched the soil. They felt the air. They trusted patterns passed down for generations. Spring meant planting. Summer meant growth. Autumn meant survival. If you respected the rhythm, the land would feed you. And in early 1816, everything suggested it would be another normal year. Seeds were planted like always. Hands pressed them gently into the soil. Fields were measured with experience, not guesswork. Animals were released into pastures, thin from winter but alive. Families talked about harvests that hadn't happened yet. Markets planned months ahead. Governments assumed stability. No alarms, no warnings, just routine. But something subtle had already changed. Not enough to panic, not enough to run, just enough to feel off. A strange kind of cold spring arrived late. That happened sometimes. People shrugged it off. Then the rain started. Not heavy storms, just endless, quiet rain. The kind that soaks into everything and never quite leaves. The sun still rose each morning, but it felt distant, weak, like it was shining through a veil. Farmers noticed the ground stayed cold longer than usual. Seeds struggled to take hold. Shoots appeared, then stopped. Still no panic. Nature corrects itself. It always had, or so they believed. By April, concerns were whispered, not shouted, not announced. Whispered. Markets noticed prices creeping upward. Merchants blamed transport delays. Officials blamed bad luck. Everyone assumed next month would fix it. That belief was powerful, because once you accept something is wrong, you have to accept what might come next, and nobody was ready for that. Then came May, and with it frost, not in one place, not in one region, across multiple countries. Fields that had finally begun to grow were burned black overnight. Entire harvests died in silence. Farmers walked through their land in disbelief. They touched leaves that crumbled at the slightest pressure. This wasn't normal, but still people waited. They replanted. They gambled everything on the idea that summer would arrive late, because the alternative was unthinkable. June came, and the cold stayed. In some places, snow fell again. Let that sink in. People lit fires inside homes that should have been warm. Winter clothes stayed on bodies that expected sunlight. Children asked questions adults couldn't answer. And for the first time, a terrifying thought began to spread quietly through villages and towns. What if summer isn't coming at all? That's the most disturbing part. The sky wasn't red. The sun hadn't disappeared. Birds still flew. Days still passed. Nothing looked like an apocalypse. But the world had stopped working. Crops refused to grow. Soil rejected seed. Warmth never came, and nobody knew why. People didn't panic yet. They didn't riot. They didn't pray harder. They didn't run. They waited. Because if summer failed once, it was terrifying. But if it failed twice, that would mean the rules were gone. June was supposed to change everything. That's what people told themselves. Spring can be cold, spring can be cruel, but summer always arrives. That belief had survived wars, famines, empires collapsing. So when June began, people waited. They watched the sky. They counted days. They felt the air each morning, hoping for warmth. It never came. In many regions, snow fell again. Not a flurry, not a moment. Actual snowfall. Fields that had already failed once were hit again. Newly planted seeds froze before they could grow. Farmers stood in silence. No anger yet, just disbelief. Because this wasn't just bad luck anymore. This was impossible. At first, people thought it was their land. Maybe the soil was cursed. Maybe the rain ruined it. Maybe God was testing them. But then the letters arrived. Merchants traveling between towns carried the same story everywhere. Cold in France, cold in Germany, cold in Switzerland, cold in England, cold across the Atlantic in North America. Different places, same failure. That's when fear changed shape. This wasn't a regional disaster. This was everywhere. People struggled to explain what they felt. The sun was visible, but it didn't warm. Days looked bright, yet the air stayed cold. It felt like the world was wrapped in something invisible, something blocking life itself. Children played less. Animals grew thin. Grass refused to grow tall. Nature wasn't violent, it was withholding. By mid-June, markets reacted. Grain prices rose fast. At first, people paid without complaint. Then they hesitated. Then they panicked. Bread became smaller. Meat disappeared from tables. Milk dried up as livestock weakened. Families began eating food meant for later months. Seed grain, the last thing you touch if you still believe in tomorrow. Officials didn't act immediately. They never do. They assumed the weather would correct itself, that harvests would recover. That panic was worse than the problem, so they waited. That decision would cost lives. By the time authorities realized this wasn't temporary, it was already too late. Somewhere between late June and early July, a quiet realization spread. Not shouted, not announced. Felt summer wasn't late, it wasn't coming at all. And if summer failed, what would happen in winter? People stopped planning months ahead. They planned days ahead. Families rationed food. Markets closed early. Farmers stopped replanting. Why waste seed if the land refuses to cooperate? This is where the psychology shifts. Hope doesn't vanish instantly, it shrinks. By July, the cold had already stolen one harvest, but something worse was coming, because hunger hadn't fully arrived yet, and when it did, it wouldn't arrive quietly. Hunger doesn't arrive all at once, it creeps, quietly. At first, people just felt uneasy, then uncomfortable, then afraid. By late July of 1816, food stopped being a background detail of life and became the only thing that mattered. Bread had always been ordinary, cheap, everywhere. Reliable, now it was guarded, prices doubled, then tripled. A loaf that once fed a family now cost a day's wages. People stared at bakery windows longer than usual. They counted coins in their hands. They walked away empty-handed. And when bread disappears, order disappears with it. Markets used to be loud but familiar. Now they were tense. Arguments broke out over scraps. Merchants hid supplies. Rumors spread of hoarding. In some towns, grain stores were locked behind guards. In others, they were looted. Not by criminals, by fathers, by mothers, by people who had never stolen before. Because starvation rewrites morality. There were no enemy armies, no invasions. Yet cities burned with anger. Bread riots erupted across Europe, in England, in France, in parts of Germany and Switzerland. Crowds gathered not to protest politics, but to demand food. Soldiers were deployed not to fight enemies, but to protect grain from their own people. Think about that. Civilization pointing weapons inward. Decisions were made that no one ever talked about. Parents skipped meals so children could eat. Children grew thin anyway. Seed grain was consumed, the final act of desperation. That seed was never meant to be eaten. It was meant to secure the future. Once it was gone, people knew there would be no next harvest. This wasn't survival anymore, it was delay. Animals began to die, not from disease, from hunger. Pastures never recovered. Hay stores emptied. Cows were slaughtered early. Sheep weakened. Horses collapsed. Without animals, farms collapsed completely. The agricultural system unraveled piece by piece. And through all of this, the cold stayed. Rain continued. Skies stayed gray. The sun remained weak. There was no relief, no sign of correction. Only the slow realization that nature was not coming to help. Letters from everywhere say the same thing. News traveled slowly in 1816, but even slow news became overwhelming. Every letter told the same story: no crops, no food, no warmth, from villages, from cities, from across oceans. This wasn't misfortune. This was systemic collapse. At some point, people stopped asking when it would end. They started asking, will it ever end? That question is dangerous, because once people lose faith in tomorrow, they stop behaving like neighbors. By the end of summer, the world was starving. But something darker was about to emerge, because hunger breaks the body, fear breaks the mind, and next, fear would turn spiritual. When people can't explain what's happening to their bodies, they look for answers that explain their souls. By late summer of 1816, the question was no longer about crops. It was about why. Why the cold didn't leave. Why prayers weren't working. Why the sun felt distant. And when no answers came, fear changed form. Church bells rang constantly, not for celebration, for funerals. People packed inside cathedrals and village chapels, shoulder to shoulder, desperate for reassurance. Priests spoke of judgment, of punishment, of sins that had angered God. Some sermons were calm, others were terrifying. The message was simple. This is happening for a reason, and if it was a reason, someone must be at fault. People began talking about the end of the world, not metaphorically, literally. They compared the cold skies to biblical warnings, the famine to divine cleansing. Pamphlets circulated, rumors multiplied. Some believed angels had turned away. Others believed demons walked the land. When reality collapses, imagination rushes in to fill the gap. Reason science had no answers. Weather records were useless. Seasonal logic had failed. So people turned to old beliefs, curses, omens, signs in the sky. Strange cloud formations became messages. Thunder was interpreted as warning. Every unusual event became proof that something supernatural was unfolding. And once superstition takes control, it doesn't let go easily. Faith, splits, society, religion didn't unite people. It divided them. Some prayed harder. Others lost faith entirely. Some believed obedience would save them. Others believed sacrifice was required. Communities fractured along belief lines, and fear made everyone suspicious. This is the part no one was prepared for. People prayed constantly, and nothing changed. The cold stayed, the hunger stayed, the suffering stayed. Priests died of starvation like everyone else. The faithful collapsed beside the doubtful. There was no pattern, no reward, no mercy. And when God appears silent, people don't become peaceful. They become desperate. If the heavens weren't responding, then the problem must be here. People began looking at each other differently. Who sinned? Who angered God? Who brought this upon us? Fear needs a target, and soon that need would turn outward. The cold broke the land. Hunger broke the body. But now something worse was breaking: trust. And once trust collapses, society follows. Hunger doesn't just empty stomachs, it empties patience, empathy, restraint. By late 1816, something had changed in the way people looked at each other. Not openly, not violently at first, subtly. The look that said, "I don't trust you." Markets were no longer places of exchange. They were places of suspicion. People watched hands, they watched bags, they watched faces. Every stranger was a possible threat, every neighbor a possible hoarder. Doors were locked earlier. Windows stayed shut longer. The sense of community, the quiet agreement that we're in this together, began to fade. Families started leaving, not traveling, not relocating, running. Villages emptied slowly, then suddenly. Farms were abandoned mid-season. Homes left unlocked because there was nothing worth stealing. People moved toward cities believing food might be there. Cities believed the countryside was exaggerating. Both were wrong. Cities were not built for starvation. Crowded streets turned suffocating. Shelters overflowed. Disease spread easily among the weakened. Jobs vanished because nothing functioned normally anymore. Crime didn't explode, it crept. Thefts at night, fights over scraps. people disappearing. Authorities were overwhelmed. There were too many hungry mouths and too few answers. This is the hardest part to talk about, because it's not dramatic. It's quiet. People stopped helping strangers, then they stopped helping neighbors, then sometimes they stopped helping family, not out of cruelty, out of fear. Every piece of food given away felt like a death sentence. Survival narrowed the world. With fear everywhere, rumors gained power. Some said certain towns were cursed. Others claimed outsiders brought the cold. Migrants were blamed for shortages. Travelers were treated like threats. Communities turned inward. Walls went up, not physical ones but psychological. Trust evaporated. Civilization runs on an unspoken rule. We believe tomorrow will come. In 1816, that belief collapsed. People stopped planning futures, stopped repairing homes, stopped thinking long-term. They lived meal to meal. And when that happens, society doesn't collapse loudly. It erodes. There was no enemy to fight, no army to defeat, no plague to quarantine, no tyrant to overthrow, just a world that had stopped providing. And that realization stripped people of control. By now, millions were suffering. Civilization was bending. But the most horrifying truth was still hidden. Because all of this pain, all of this death, had a cause no one could see. For an entire year, people suffered without an enemy. They blamed the land. They blamed God. They blamed each other. But the truth was nowhere near their fields, nowhere near their cities, nowhere near their prayers. It was on the other side of the planet. In April of 1815, while Europe and North America went about their lives, something unimaginable happened near the equator. On a remote island in Southeast Asia stood a mountain few people outside the region had ever heard of. Mount Tambora. On that day, it didn't rumble. It exploded. The eruption was not ordinary. It was one of the most powerful volcanic explosions in recorded human history. The blast was heard more than 1,000 miles away. The force tore the mountain apart. Entire villages were erased in seconds. But the true damage wasn't local. It went up. Tambora hurled massive amounts of ash, sulfur, and gas high into the atmosphere, far higher than normal storms or clouds, so high that global winds carried it around the earth. An invisible veil began to spread, not dark enough to block the sun completely, not obvious enough to notice, just enough to weaken it. This is the cruelest detail. The sun never disappeared, it rose every day. It shone through the clouds, but its warmth was filtered, scattered, diluted. The planet cooled slowly and unevenly, weather patterns collapsed, rain cycles broke, seasons lost their meaning, and no one connected the suffering to a volcano they would never see. Carved without knowing why. They froze without understanding the cause. They prayed to skies that looked perfectly normal. Think about that. The explanation existed, but it was unreachable. There was no global communication, no satellites, no climate science, just isolated civilizations experiencing the same nightmare alone. The disaster wasn't malicious. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't even rare on a geological timescale. It was natural. One eruption, one moment. And the entire planet paid the price. Wars have enemies. Plagues have symptoms. But this, there was nothing to fight, nothing to cure, nothing to negotiate with. Just an atmosphere quietly altered beyond human control. Civilization had been undone by physics. By the time the skies began to clear, by the time temperatures slowly normalized, millions were already dead. The damage was permanent, and the people who suffered would never know the truth. They lived and died believing the world had simply betrayed them. The mystery was solved, but the suffering wasn't undone, because the final question remained. What happens after a civilization survives something it never understood? The cold didn't end dramatically. There was no announcement, no signal from the sky. 1 year slowly. The temperatures rose, the rain eased, the sun felt warmer, crops began to grow again. But by the time nature corrected itself, the damage was already carved deep into humanity. People didn't celebrate. They were too tired, too thin, too cautious. Villages that once bustled with life were half empty. Some were gone entirely. Graves dotted landscapes that used to be farms. Those who survived didn't feel lucky. They felt changed. Nothing felt certain anymore before 1816. People trusted patterns. After 1816, they questioned them. Farmers no longer assumed seasons would behave. Governments no longer assumed stability was permanent. People learned something terrifying. The world does not owe us consistency. This wasn't just famine. It was trauma. Art grew darker. Stories became obsessed with nature's power and human fragility. Writers and painters fixated on isolation, despair, and uncontrollable forces. The Romantic movement exploded not because life was beautiful, but because it was dangerous. Began asking new questions. Weather was no longer just God's will. Nature became something to study, not just accept. Agriculture slowly modernized. Food systems diversified. But the memory lingered. A quiet understanding that progress could be reversed. The people of 1816 never learned what caused their suffering. They lived their entire lives without knowing. No explanation. No closure. Just the memory of a year when reality stopped working. And that matters, because history isn't just about what happened. It's about what it taught. They didn't know why the world changed, how long it would last, or if life would ever feel normal again. They lived with uncertainty, with isolation, with fear of tomorrow. Now ask yourself honestly, does that really feel like ancient history, or does it feel familiar? The year without a summer wasn't just a climate disaster. It was a reminder that civilization survives not because it's strong, but because nature allows it to. And sometimes, nature changes its mind.